understand what she meant until I got to the last batch. I made them in like batches of 30 or 40. So I got to the last batch, and that's when it hit me what she meant by this metaphor for marriage. Because I wanted to throw every single one of them damn goblets against the wall. So tired of doing it. Like, no! And that feeling, and then I saw her face in my mind, and like, that's what she meant. You can't throw the last batch against the wall. You gotta finish. You gotta stick with it. And so that was a really really fun moment for me.
That's my goblet story too.
You got a goblet story?
Bill Brennan's goblet story.
Oh, Bill Brennan's goblet story. Boy, never do commissions for people. Where's Bill?
Yeah, he's not here.
No, yeah, Bill's. I tried a couple of different things, and I made like 25 goblets. Bill got 2 good ones. I kept 2 good ones. The rest were trash. Half of them I dumped off of the tray onto the floor. And the other half just didn't work. You know, I tried some different things that I thought would be great that were just. And then I was left with these. I had probably 6 different goblets with Bill and Kim's name on it. Like, what am I going to do with these? So I gave a few of them to Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you keep them so that you could put them on the table at Christmas so he could go down there and go, ooh, wait.
Yeah. Sell them at the pottery sale. Half price. Sorry, so I always start with the cups, the cup part. So can dictate what the bottom looks like. And I know that I'm going to trim these, so I leave a little bit extra down at the bottom. For me, it's that inside has to be curved, so I try to leave a nice dish down at the bottom of the cup. And then get that base nice and small for 2 reasons. 1, so I don't have to trim too much. 2, so I get the most mileage out of my clay. So you can see it sort of coming into shape already. Real basic, simple form. You could get as creative with it as you wanted, I suppose. There's my rib. This is not the ideal tool caddy, if anybody's wondering. So those throw rings are kind of nice, but they don't seem very formal, like a goblet sort of ends up being. And I can say a couple of things about that too, because I think there's ways that you can make them seem more formal than they might be, or less formal than they might be. And that sort of exists within the stem. I think it seems like chalices or goblets that have a nice tall stem. The taller they get, the more sort of ceremonial they seem. The shorter that stem gets, the more everyday use they seem. And I think the evidence is in a brandy snifter. The real short stem need to be used every day. So the way I go about this is to get that outside sort of set, and then with my sponge, I need to soak up that water that's on the inside, but I'll take the opportunity to kind of further curve that bottom out. It's hard for me to see, but I'm sure you're seeing it sort of get a little fatter down there. Could be even maybe a little bit more. Like that. Go back and clean it up. toying with that shape. And then at times I've with a nice sharp bend, and then the finger just below the bend, holding that spot. Be a nice little subtle design feature, and also that shape a lot of times feels nice against the lip. Slight curve. Yeah, there it is. Maybe just a quick little removal there. And these are such a sort of tedious process. I don't think making one is worth it. You know, I would make at least 3 to make it worth your time. You know. It seems like it takes a lot. I took a long break from making them after I had a wedding. Now when I do them,
how long did it take you to throw 190? Like how many weeks or?
I think it was like over the course of maybe 5 weeks or something like that. I was working on my undergraduate degree, so I was doing lots of other things too. So now to do 200 of them, you know, maybe a few days. Because now when I do them, I'll do like a batch of 50, and I can usually, you know, throw the pieces in one day and then put them together the next, and still have sort of extra time mixed in.
So do you throw them all like this, or do you ever throw them off the hump as well?
I never throw them off the hump.
Okay.
No, and the S-cracking problem with throwing off the hump is so frustrating. I've tried many different things to remedy it, and I've yet to master its secrets. So yeah, it's usually individual pieces. And you know, if you have them sort of, you spend the time to pre-make each piece and have them ready to go, you can get into a pretty good rhythm.
Okay.
Or I don't think it's much slower.
And then they're all the same size because they're all weighed out.
Right, you know, and you could, you know, sort of weigh out balls of clay on the top of your hump, you know, that were similar enough. And when there's 198, you know, it's pretty easy to find a pair. It was a mistake, actually, to do, because it brought out the worst in people. There was, like, goblets from the head table that were taken. There was, people had theirs sort of nabbed from behind their back, and there was, like, people going around looking for pairs, because that's sort of so ingrained in who we are. You're like, okay, these two are exactly the same height, that's what I want. Like, who cares? What's the difference? What? It's not like they came out of a mold. You want them to come out of a mold? I should have done that. And I said, you know, yeah, you know, everybody that's here gets one. Well, you know, those that had kids figured, well, I've got 6 kids here, so, and me and my husband, now we get 8. You know, like, well, no, not really. Okay, maybe. I don't know. I was a little bitter over the whole thing in the end, you know, because I was disappointed that it was used so badly. I should have been flattered, I suppose. So now for the stem, it's nice to have that cup there to judge, because I think that the foot needs to be similar to the lip. It gets awkward the further away from that dimension you get. Now, I know I've got way too much clay here. I'm going to have to remove some. But for the stem, I'll center and then drop the well all the way down to the bat. So there's no floor in the stem part. And then thinking about that diameter and trying to match that, I'll then just throw a cylinder to begin with. Get it nice and thin down at the bottom. Bring it up, you know, relatively carefully. And just from experience, well, we'll just go with that and see how it happens. But I know this is going to end up being too tall for what I want. From there, there's a little bit of a lip on the inside that I like to clean away. So I'll take that real sharp edge of my rib and just kind of push it up to that inside edge and try to clip off that little skirt part that's next to the wall. That'll save me a little time in the end after I put them together. Unfortunately, we won't see putting them together tonight, just because they both need to be leather hard. So from that cylinder, then it's about starting to collar it in, and however you're comfortable collaring, I think is fine. I've started, instead of this, I've started the 6-gun technique. So I'm riding on that outside part of my middle finger and then pushing with my pointer fingers, and then my thumbs end up sort of up a little higher and sort of guiding. You can make a little less contact with that configuration. And then, like always, as you're collaring, it gets thicker, so I'll rethrow. I don't bother rethrowing anything down here because I spent the time in the beginning to make it thin enough. Yet I still don't have a needle tool. So I'll reach way down in there as far as I can and try to thin it out. Whoa. And I just can keep working it up into that funnel. And at at this point now, I'm not too concerned about keeping it thinner because I want this stem to be rather thick, actually, because it'll, if you get them too thin, they like to warp in the kiln and get a lean to them. So I don't make them much thinner than that, which is pretty thick in comparison to the cup. This will be the trick. I'm under pressure. I'll never be able to do it. Nope. Do you edit these videos, Danny?
Nope.
Damn it! There, you're gonna have to edit that.
No, I won't. Now we'll all just have to prove we're over 18.
I suppose there's all kinds of crap on YouTube. There we go. Okay. So, upside down funnel. Right. But there's a couple of things that I think really make it better from here, because I've seen a lot of people sort of stop here and then just attach, and that's fine. But to get a little more creative with it, I learned this from not Bob Briscoe. What was his name? It'll come, maybe. So I'll reach down inside with the finger, and then using my sort of natural shape that is in between my two fingers there, push some clay out into that little zone, and you kind of have to like pick some clay up and move it, and then push. So you don't want to get it too thin, so that little bump becomes a nice place for your fingers to kind of grab onto and rest and nestle into, instead of it just being straight up and down. Less phallic. And I know from experience still that this is going to be too tall for what I want, so I'm going to take off a little bit more.
That's Teresa, it's just not the same.
No, I'm just saying maybe it's a little more phallic.
You're right. And so the last move I do, well, not the last, but one of the last things I'll do is grab that lip in between my two fingers here, and I'll definitely brace with my other hand, and then I roll my fingers forward like this, and then roll my hand out. It might take a little bit of practice to get it, but that's what it ends up being. And so now there's a much broader attaching zone to deal with. You get a much more sturdy attachment from that. And I'll definitely not flatten it out, but leave a bit of a dish there that might match the dish that'll be on the cup. And hopefully they're not too far into leather hard where it won't flex a little bit. And then refine that zone a little bit with my finger, and then the rest gets done with the rib. And it seems like a dry hand, dry rib situation is best. And I'll go with a backwards bend on the rib. Get up underneath that lip first, and then as I drop down, kind of let that bottom flop loose, sort of like I did with the bottle 2 weeks ago. Is that 2 weeks ago already? Yeah. So here we go. Get up underneath there, very gently, hold for a second, and then start working my way down, and then let that bottom lip flop down, and you're left with a pretty pristine surface that has that inside curve versus a sort of bulbous type curve.
Make a nice candlestick too.
Yeah. And then with my little footer tool, come back, clean up that edge.
It's almost like you know what you're doing.
It's almost like I've done it before.
Maybe once or twice.
And I love that little extra edge.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a chalice.
Yeah. And then soften those edges so you don't cut your friends.
Making the 198.
Assuming you're drinking with and then there's a real issue here to get this off of the wheel. And when I've been in production with these, I don't have enough bats. You know, like I don't have 50 bats. And so I've gone to the paint stripper method of getting it off. So this one is from Harbor Freight. I don't recommend buying the paint stripper from Harbor Freight because the switches blow on them really easy. So spend the extra few dollars, go to Menards and buy one there because the switches will last much longer. A hairdryer would work, but it's so much slower. This end gets blasting hot. You'll see that it turns red right away, and you can kind of see the red color on the piece. And this doesn't take long. And in production, that really means a lot. So all I do is just hit this neck area, so I've got somewhere to grab it. And it speed dries that zone, but what ends up happening is the moisture sort of redistributes itself and it evens back out again in the end. It's a paint stripper.
Or heat gun.
Yeah, heat gun paint stripper.
Yeah, I broke many windows with that.
And then because, in this case, because there's no floor in this thing, when you run your wire underneath, definitely run the wire with the wheel turning. Because there's no floor, if you try to drag through with the wheel still, you'll warp out the shape of that foot. And so that dryness then allows me to kind of wiggle it up loose and get it onto the floor. And then at leather hard, what I do, and I'm hoping to do this next week for you, is to take the cup, flip it over, lug it in place, trim it, and then while it's still in place, slip and score where this is going to attach, put that on top, get it centered, and then I'll do just a little bit of trimming on that inside to clean that up. And then they're sort of done. Now I've got some more clay here. There's another method you can use. Instead of throwing the stem right side up, you can throw the stem upside down. I'm not happy with how the shape comes out for me, but I haven't made a lot of them this way, so I don't really know if it could be better, you know. It seems maybe a little faster, but it definitely has a different aesthetic. So here, thinking about it as an upside down situation, drop that well and leave a floor in there. But I'm not going to open it up at all. I want that to stay nice and small. And then my first move is to really push that bottom in and then start to throw. And when you've got a real small thing like this, when I'm throwing, I have a tendency to hook my finger around the outside over here. These outside fingers are definitely sort of, I'm using all three fingers almost to help pull it up. And then I'm going to leave it kind of thick down there because that's the attaching zone. And then I'm just kind of pull this open to what that diameter might be. And then down here, I'll give it a little bit of a squeeze. Throw. And so there's that sort of same bump again, but it's a little bit different. I think with practice it could be somewhat similar. And then the rib. So the nice thing about this is you don't have to trim that inside edge of the foot because that's the hardest part. And I usually trim that inside edge right after I've attached. But in an ideal world, you should take it off after you've done the attachment and then wait for a little stiffer leather hard and then put it back on the wheel and trim it. But I've never got that much time, so you kind of have to hold it in place and trim, and it catches. And I lose a few usually trying to do it. And then you can clean up this inside if you like, using that edge of your modeling knife and just kind of drag it up there. Depends on whether or not you want those marks in there or not. And so with this, then, it's a little easier to kind of grab it just like that. You don't have to heat it. But you can see how that shape just isn't as elegant, and it's because this is so small here. It's real floppy and it's real sort of difficult to negotiate. And like I say, I think if I spent more time working at it, that it would get better. But it's real hard to see that shape.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, you almost. Some people will have a mirror in front of them. And that helps.
It almost looks like the top of the goblet.
Almost. Yeah. Flute. Champagne flute or something. Yeah. I prefer the right side up method. It's a little more tedious, but the result is way better. But I think there's a nice sort of informal relationship that happens, or you get a nice informal type cup when you don't exceed the height of the cup with the stem. They should be, in my mind anyway, somewhat equal. And then, the taller it gets, the more sort of ceremonial it starts to feel. The shorter it gets, the more sniftery it becomes. And those can be really nice. And actually, there's a line of beer glasses too that have that same sort of brandy snifter shape. Though I don't like beer out of ceramic; it doesn't taste right. Something's wrong
It's
with
made out
it.
of glass. Huh?
Yeah. Or the can.
Oh.
Or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. I do tend not to
Not
pour
the
my
jug,
beer
though.
into it. If I am pouring my beer into something, it's usually not ceramic. I think there's some sort of flavor thing that happens. It makes it different somehow.
Maybe
It gets real
ceramic.
foamy.
Does the ceramic hold the whatever temperature ceramic becomes it? Whereas glass,
It's a better insulator, that's for sure.
Yeah, so maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Don't talk about beer. I have to go home.
Yeah. Sorry, I gotta go.